everyone. Sorry the audio is so bad. I'm currently in an airport picking someone up. I thought someone else was going to do this, but unfortunately that didn't happen. So we are Climate Group B, or I guess I'm Climate Group B at the moment. Um, so yeah, our Sustainable Development Goal from the UN was number 13, climate action. The goal was to combat climate change, as you would assume from the title. Uh, it has a couple of strategies to do this. One of them is to increase resilience to climate disasters. So that would be referencing, for instance, making buildings stronger in Florida so that they don't collapse and cause runoff into the water. Integrate climate change in planning and policies. So like perhaps integrating the idea that Treasure Island might be underwater in however many years. Maybe we don't need to create a lot of development on it that'll then get washed out, put in the water, a lot of useless stuff happening there. Build knowledge on climate change. So maybe that could include funding professors or like increasing the amount of grants available to universities for research on climate change and developing solutions. And then another thing would be to implement strategies because it's great to talk about this stuff, but it doesn't really mean anything if it doesn't happen. Like, we'll get to that later. And then another would be promote mechanisms which help with planning, which could be applied in less developed countries which may have trouble affording or finding the infrastructure to accomplish all the goals to do with climate change. Couple examples of solutions to this problem would be to avoid fossil fuel consumption and switch to more renewable sources of energy. That's kind of an obvious one. It puts most of the onus to stopping this on corporations. And then another one would be to use renewable resources for fuel. But as I'm sure most of us have heard, it's kind of hard to find in terms of finding efficient ones. So the religion we chose in relation to this sustainable development goal is Buddhism. Uh, One of the ways it kind of relates is Buddhist beliefs kind of preach oneness with nature for everyone, and so they kind of believe that we should be integrated with our climate, and I think that's a good thing to keep in mind as a lot of people, sometimes including myself, seem to distance ourselves from the environment, even though it's a huge part of our lives and a huge part of other people's lives. And one of the ways you could think about this is with tourism. Like a lot of Florida's economy thrives upon the health of its environmental systems. And so without that, there'd be a lot less money to go around in Florida and the quality of life would decrease. Not to mention just one of the perks about living in Florida is all the wildlife. And so without all of that, it wouldn't be great. And native wildlife also helps combat climate change in ways that it helps fix nitrogen and carbon and provides oxygen to the atmosphere with less maintenance. I'll get into that later. And then another thing is a resistance to consumerism is part of the Buddhist belief system. One of the examples for that would be like fast fashion and how much of a carbon footprint that creates. Um, so I think that could really help. And in theory, most Buddhist ideas are eco-friendly, as I kind of mentioned, but in practice, it seems that they don't do much, whether it's through faith-based organizations or through volunteering. I do have an example in the presentation, but it's kind of niche and hard to find. But yeah, so I think if they acted more upon their ideas, the world would be a better place. Like I read that Buddhist countries, even though Buddhism is an idea you would think would help climate change, a lot of Buddhist countries are ranked around the 100 mark in terms of most eco-friendly countries, whether that's due to GDP per capita or just the um, on ineffectiveness of climate change policies and making it harder for the people to live personally. I don't really know. And then Buddhist leaders and organizations featured left is Chetsong Rinpoche, and he's high up in the Buddhist thing, and he seems to be focusing more on the environmental and ecological change and helping to prevent climate change or whatnot. He's he's kind of spearheading the effort from what I could find. There's a lot of articles about him online. The slide following this, I have an example of one of the projects he did, and I think if all of the leaders were like him, a lot more stuff would get done. Um, yeah. So an application, one of the examples I'm going to use is a Buddhist tree planting in Ladakh, India. It's in the Himalayas. Because of climate change, a lot of their glaciers kind of melted and water wasn't held very well, and so the whole area kind of dried out. And Rinpoche believed that um, he had a more organic vision for what the area should look like, rather than it just being a dry wasteland that used to once have greenery and life in it. And some of the benefits to the plants are that they're going to help filter the water better. It's going to be cleaner water, but they're also going to like hold the structure of the mountains and the glacier area without, because of their root system, it holds sediment together and it'll help hold water. Um, but yeah, some of the things they did is they planted native plants. What they also did is they created glacier babies, is really the only way I'd call it, which are little glaciers that slowly accumulate ice over time, and they're hoping that those ice reservoirs will help build water for the ecosystem, and that'll help the area fight climate change, along with helping the native peoples to have a more reliable source of water. Um, Something interesting that I read, that it wasn't just villagers and people from that area, but also soldiers in the Indian army helped, Buddhist volunteers helped, and so it kind of shows that like even if traditionally it doesn't seem like Buddhism accomplishes much in this department, there is evidence for its impact. And yeah, and then application to Tampa Bay. I mean, all of you kind of live in Tampa Bay. If you're going to USF, I would assume. And if you look around, a lot of it's either artificial lawns or non-native grasses and lawns. A lot of people use non-native plants because they look nice, or they're cheaper to maintain than other alternatives. But I would argue that the easiest way to do it would be to use natural plants, because, as mentioned previously, the natural and native plants will help fix nitrogen within the system, which will make the water quality better as it filters out more nutrients, keeping harmful algae blooms like Carina brevis, for instance, from spawning after a bloom of trichodesmium. Um, I know UF has multiple grants in which they help people and businesses and companies and whatnot replace their non-native species with native species, because it is so important, and so it's also something that's economically feasible. Um, and then another benefit to native plants is it provides space for native species to live, and they'll overall work better. They'll also cost less in the long term, as they will require less water to maintain because they'll be used to Florida's climate, and less fertilizer to maintain because they're used to the natural kind of soils, and also produce a smaller carbon footprint, as the vehicles or tools to maintain them won't be needed or used as heavily. And I think if implemented through, I think we have something like 30 plus Buddhist temples in Tampa Bay, probably way more than that. It could be more impactful if it spread out further among them. And then that's kind of the whole presentation. I think a few key takeaways are that while Buddhism does show that it helps somewhat, it doesn't seem to do enough to reinforce the amount of ideals that they speak, and the amount of perceived judgment that they cast onto others. Some of the Buddhist ideals to take away from this are lower consumerism, and trying to be more conscious of what you're doing in the environment. Um, Another takeaway would be the planting of native grasses in Florida could keep Carina brevis blooms down, which could then boost Florida's economy because the fish kills are bad for the fishing economy, and just the overall smell keeps people from wanting to go to the beach. And that is it. Thank you for y'all's time. Again, I'm sorry that audio is so janky. I thought someone else would be doing this, but I'm sitting here in the airport. So, peace. All right.